So, Mark, security at the expense of usability comes at the expense of security.
Cool.
Do you remember that
I
quote?
yes, I quite love that to be fair. Uh, One thing that you're gonna see a lot of folks talking right now is about platform engineering and developer experience. And people don't think about security, and I think that's the core stuff, right? If you see like incidents in companies like Coinbase the last couple of weeks, or the whole thing with the CISO from Uber, if you do not think how to put security on pipeline in a way that your users can feel that's invisible for them, they will find a way to jump
Mm.
that ladder. And if you think about software engineers, right, I always like to say like most of them, the most smart people I met in my career were software engineers. So if you try to block their work putting security guardrails without understanding how to use that as a helper for them, not as another blocker, they will just jump and find a way to do the work without thinking about security. And you want people to think about security, right? In an ideal, I like to say like in an ideal world, people don't think about cybersecurity because everybody's friends. But sadly, we don't live in an ideal world. We are seeing wars that the cyber warfare is just getting worse and worse. So pretty much how you can have security without slowing down your company, how you can have security that people can use in a nice and easy way. And Joe, one thing that comes to my mind, I was talking with a friend, he's working in one of the companies that help healthcare in the UK, and he started to think like how you put security for people who need 2FA or MFA and they cannot see. So how you can put security in places that people need because more and more you need to have your data, you need to have your privacy, but how you put that in a way that will be slow and steady and will be okay for the users. So I think that's quite I quite like that quote that I think it's like Arvik law, if not wrong, because just shows us how evolved security becomes a part of our day to day, but in a way that needs to be like softer, like AI will be in the next years, easy to use, simple, and help us not create another blockers.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about security in AI and the software
Cool.
vulnerabilities, but specifically around vibe coding, which is probably
Cool.
the biggest buzzword in the market at the moment.
Cool. I quite love that. It's a running joke with people who do offensive security and what we so call pen test and head team. That vibe coding is the next gold pot because people are just creating code without understanding the security problems with that. There was one guy in X or in LinkedIn a couple of months ago. He did write a website really quick with one of these tools, like really like just talking, and then start to post like, "Oh, I don't need any engineers." And then one not so ethical hacker did find the site and start with explore.
Oh, really?
S- Yeah, so the main thing that the guy was doing, he was not exploring any, let's say, harmful data. He was not trying to get customer data. He was just using to run crypto minings and other things. So the amount of money that the guy was spending because he was not thinking about security doing vibe coding because he don't understand what is security in the perspective of software was quite bad because people start to explore like, oh, now you have some instance, you have some resources in the web that anybody can use. I use that for free for my goodwill. So that was the main thing. I still have this feeling that people don't think about how vibe coding do not think about security and talking especially about AI, right? We are talking a lot that AI is helping the software engineers, the AI is helping the people who do not understand software to write up and so on. But we never talk about how AI is helping the attackers, how AI is helping the scammers. We've seen a lot of things about like deep fakes and etc., tagging people who don't understand well. So how do we live in this new world and we help? Okay, now it's quite great that you can do like MVPs, quite fast things about simple stuff that will
Mm.
take months in the past, but you need to understand how do you evolve and how do that. One thing that I quite like to say is we have a lot of computer scientists or computer engineers, but not everybody knows how to build a computer. Like I have my formation in computer science, I don't know how to build a computer, but I know how to do code, right? But are different things like this. That's why you need hardware engineers. That's why you need
Mm.
software engineers. It's quite the same thing with vibe coding. Will help a lot, but if you do not understand the limitations and the risks of it, it's quite funny. One personal case about that. My father-in-law, he's a civil engineer, and he's doing some vibe coding. And I was checking with him because he was like in an infinite loop, and the whole thing is start just to charge him like oh no, stop that. And my wife know how to code as well.
Oh my
So like
God, how
okay,
much did it charge him?
Oh, it was nice because we got like a threshold was like a 50 quid, like, and
Ah, okay.
his budget was like 20 quid, like, oh, that's a problem. But again, that's not the onus of the system. That's the onus of the person who is using. So
Yeah,
when you think about vibe coding, is exactly that. It's not the risk of the company who are offering you vibe coding, but it's the risk of the person who is doing without having the knowledge. I'm not saying that security is the most important, only important thing, and then we need to have to block everything. But when you jump in cold waters, you need to understand the risk of being the cold waters. So I
yeah,
think that's the main stuff with vibe coding. It's amazing. I think that's one stuff that's helping a lot, especially for product managers. But one thing is to understand and to create the draft of softwares. The other thing is to have a software that's out in the wild that people can interact and can take advantage of that.
yeah, yeah. I think it's becoming something that people are picking up really, really quickly. But I think a lot of the time, I think what you was alluding to there as well is picking it up without really understanding the limitations, the dangers, the pitfalls that you can fall into. If, for example, the feedback loop, or the continuous loop
Mhm.
cycle, right, where you're getting billed in that case 50 quid when his limit was 20. But if you're a business and you get caught in some kind of filling in a form, for example, and then you keep that running and the loop's running, that could be hundreds or
You'll
even
get
thousands
upset.
over the weekend.
Exactly. And one thing that I like to think is if you think about relativity, right? Like X rays and etc.
Mm,
In the past, we used that without understanding the risks that can make harm to us. Like people used to sell uranium. Oh, that's can you see that kind of green glass was quite nice. And then as we evolve as human beings, as we evolve the knowledge, we start to say, okay, that maybe we need to understand how to use that in a better way. I
mm,
think that's the stuff with AI. Like in the near future, I really think that AI can to stay, but I think that will change a lot, and then we're gonna look like in 2 or 3 years, like, oh, we are using that in such a bad way. And
yeah.
I not even talk about the whole climate change bit, how the amount of energy that we spend just to say, there's a nice quote about Salt, like just stop to say thank you to the model because you are spending a lot of more energy. But people do not understand that, right? They do not understand what they are interacting with, how the data
Mm,
is moving, and how this can be good and bad, right? The amount of incidents that we are seeing happening in some companies that people was doing code with AI, like, oh, can you do that? And then the AI find their way to sort out the problem and just shut down the rest. But they did sort out the problem because as a model, they do not understand the feelings and the needs. They just understand the input. So any tool, it's good as the person who is using the tool. So if you have
yeah.
a person who's like because you don't understand security, it will not be okay. And then you see this kind of stuff with a lot of companies doing AI memos, like they just post like, oh, we're gonna be AI first company. And I really think that an engineer that know how to use AI tools will be more employable and more stronger than an engineer who does not know how to use it. But you need to proper know how to use the tool.
So that's really interesting. So are you saying is that more like prompt engineering then?
Oh, no, no, to be fair, is more likely if you think about the history of software engineers, how do you use more tools, right? So we have IDEs that come like decades ago, and then the engineers how to use that, you autocomplete, understand how Go will be faster, and the
Hmm.
implement will be okay. I think the prompt engineer is one thing that will make sense if you have good software engineers, for example, or good biomedical engineers you choose that understand the whole context so they can use the tool to help them to improve. I think the whole idea that people sell that a person will do prompt engineer understand and just put code, it don't make sense. It's like this thing. It's not about the answers, but about the questions. So
Hmm.
if you know how to do the right questions for the AI, it will quite help. And right now, I was quite skeptical in the beginning, but I use AI a lot in my work. And for example, we did open a small company, and to do all the memos for the company, all the legal part was a way faster with AI. Like, oh, we have this company, why don't you think that? How do you create? Can you show me models? But you need to understand what you want to do, right?
Mm.
That's a lovely paper that shows if you think about scientific papers, some specific words start to pop up after AI because people are just running things in ChatGPT,
Hmm.
and you start with some words like even in LinkedIn, like, oh, that's a AI post. I can see that's a AI post
Yeah, yeah.
because you see that kind of word like, oh God, not again, and exactly that. If you're not putting the correct prompt, the AI will just hallucinate. I gave a talk about GPU security a few months ago, and I was using AI to help with these slides. It was so bizarre the amount of hallucination that I got. Like, oh, Kubernetes only have 12 CVs. I'm like, no, 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 that's not true. Like, oh, I did confuse myself. But again, how do you trust it you? How do you trust what you're doing if you do not have the context? So I really think the way that people sells prompt engineering did not happen, but I really think that we're gonna see a lot more of engineers using AI. And even the market is waiting for that, right? If you see companies like Cursor, they just getting more money and more money. And it's really nice to use, helps a lot, but there's a threshold of like, oh, that sounds strange. If you don't have your conscience to say, oh, that's a little bit strange, how you can sort it out and how you can see what's right, what's wrong.
Okay, so I have a follow-on question. I
Yeah,
have a
of course.
cousin who is mid-20s. He has just gone through a career change. He used to be in manual work, and then a year ago he changed to be a trainee software engineer. So he's been a trainee software engineer at one of the big banks in London. His time there is now coming to an end. He's at the junior end of the scale, right? So
Hmm.
he's not a mid, he's not a senior, which in this market kind of makes him a little bit unemployable when you think about the amount of talent in the market right now. So based on what you just said, in terms of software engineers adopting these AI skills and being AI first, what would your advice be to someone like him to compete in the
So
talent market?
I do a lot of mentorship in Brazil to kids who are like in the first or second year of
Oh,
university there. And I got this question a lot.
mhm.
So the first thing is you still need to do quite well the fundamentals. So the main thing about the market is how do you put yourself in a way that people say like, oh, Joe is different of A, B, and C. So I think that I say a lot, it's kind of a cliche, is like you need to work with open source, you need to understand what the tools people are using, and you need to contribute. Because when you go to an interview, they say, okay, that guy was a junior, he did work in a great bank, but you can see how the community is seeing his work. So
Yeah.
that's part of how you treat yourself. But thinking about skills is how do you become a better engineer using AI? It's quite a simple thing. Um, People got like to run, right? So you can run or you can go by bike. I like to say that AI is a bike. You can go from A to B faster. But if I take off your bike and you need to run, you can do that in the same time. You can do the same path. So the main thing is as he has his training and he evolves, he needs to use AI, but he needs to understand the basics to pass the interviews. So it's pretty much it's quite bizarre because when AI come, we did talk a lot about hard skills, but we've seen the rise again of soft skills, like how you can present yourself in interview, how you can talk for the people, how you can show the things that you are doing.
Mm,
Because in the market, everybody gonna have the same portfolio now. There's one joke that we do in Brazil. Do you know like Pokemon, the anime?
mm, mhm,
There was one portfolio project like, oh, we're gonna do a Pokédex. And then if you open GitHub, every single person was doing a Pokédex. Like, what's what's the difference between person A and B if they do the same thing?
mm,
So it's pretty much find these small things that nobody's doing, okay, and find this kind of niche. Uh, Sadly, to be fair, I think that's the worst market for junior engineers since the 2000s when they got the whole break.
mm,
But it's how do you change yourself and you sell in a different way? Like, oh, I different because I'm not doing the same things that people are doing. The risk of AI for junior engineers, and I think that's my biggest piece of advice, is you tend to do not think. I'm gonna talk a lot about my wife because she's the smartest person I met, and then she's a PhD. But one thing she says, and she uses AI as a lot, is I need to understand why I'm asking so I do not get addicted to it.
mm,
So it's pretty much, oh, how I can do things? Just ask to AI. How I can do all this stuff. So how do you still have a critical thinking, right? So how do you look at soft and say like, that thing's not quite okay. Okay, that's prompt not make a lot of sense. So how he can show this critical thinking and pretty much he can show I can work with AI, but I can work with any tool. It's just another tool in my portfolio that I can do more. And especially show himself as a contributor in other things that people say like, oh, he's different. Like he's not
mm,
just following the path that everybody's following.
mm. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, yeah, thanks for that. I'm going
No
to
worries.
point him towards this. I didn't know you mentored as well. That's pretty cool.
Sorry? Yeah, yeah, that's quite nice. There's a this in Portuguese it's called like mentoria.
Mm,
It's so Brazil is quite big, right? I like to say that. And I'm from the northeast of Brazil, and when I moved to the UK, I live in the northeast of the UK. But sadly, the northeast of Brazil is one of the poorest regions in Brazil. So there's a lot of people, and I come from a city that got too many people working cool places, like we call like this. I think my city in Brazil is The city with most PhDs for concentration in Latin America is quite bizarre. That's a
Wow.
kind of lovely story. My father did study there, and etc. But the main thing is how do we help these people to understand the challenges of the market? And it's quite nice that one thing talking about AI and even think about your cousin. One of the guys I do mentorship, he was like, "Oh, I use AI to do tests. I use AI to do documentation. But the more important moment is when I go to architecture discussion and I can point out my points. I
Mm.
cannot go to architecture discussion like, oh, Corso is giving me the answers for the
Yeah, yeah,
things. Like, how do you show that? So I really think mentorship is quite amazing because it always shows you the other side of the coin. It's
yeah.
quite
That's
easy
awesome.
for a person who is inside of the market might say like, oh, these things are just use AI or this thing. But how do you feel how when you try to enter the market? How do you feel and what kind of challenge you are dealing with that you're on the other side of the coin? So when I was finishing university some years ago, there's AI is with us since the 70s. My final project was using AI, but it's quite different. It was not so easy, was not so open, was not so everybody expecting you to use. Was not like you go to cinema, right? And then before the trailers, you got this whole amount of things talking about AI. Look, you have Samsung AI, you have Google AI, how I do this research. But there's a kind of stuff of how do you have the creativity to use and how do you that's
Mm.
I think that's what the biggest feedback from the kids was we are using for this kind of case. I never thought about like, oh, we are doing this kind of thing, like, oh, that's nice.
Mm.
But we check, we have this human check in the end. So it's
Yeah,
nice. Mentorship, just going back to the point, mentorship is nice because you feel that you are giving back all the things that you got in the past. And especially in Brazil where the universities are for free. So all my education in Brazil was for free. That was quite nice to see like, oh, I can do that. I can help someone that was in the position I was years ago.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That's really good. Okay. So sticking on that theme then, talking about software engineering talent as a
Hmm.
broad topic, you've been working in the industry for a number of years, both as an individual contributor and
Hmm.
also as a team lead or engineering manager, right? So you've got perspective from both sides. So how aware of security should a software engineering team be? And this kind of goes back to the very first thing we were talking about.
Cool. I will start with the bad, and I can use the examples from the UK and from Brazil.
Mm,
People do not study cybersecurity in universities. We got some courses, they quite focused. One thing that we got a lot in Newcastle, like forensics, that's not kind of cybersecurity, but you touch it. But did not study because people do not show that security is a good stuff and it's quite important. And that was one of the thing with AI, right? Because as you can focus on other parts of the code, you start to understand how important it is. So let's do whole play and think about an engineer working payments, right? If he do the most amazing system working with credit cards and he don't have a good layer of authorization and authentication, doesn't matter, the company will lost a lot of money.
mm,
So I think more and more security is becoming one of the pillars that we expect for software engineers, right? If you do a search in platforms like Indeed, etc., you start to see like, oh, I want to hire a software engineer, but I need that he knows AWS. I need that he knows Kubernetes or choose another buzzword. And I think security is becoming more and more, and you see that in software engineers questions. One of the companies that are doing some consulting with, they are hiring for software engineer, especially with security. And that's quite nice because that was of the mindset of companies like at the time Facebook or Google. They used
mm,
to hire software engineers and teach them security, not the other way around. There's some places in security that you need to be quite niche, but in the overall, I think we are expecting more. The new software engineers understand more and they can talk about security. Especially if you got to a big product company, we got this thing they call like request for comments, like, oh, we want to do this new feature for Joe, and then we want to think about resiliency, scalability, all the cool things.
mm.
But right now you see more and more people say like, oh, we need to think about security as well, right? If you think about incidents and all the other things, and if you think even about state attacks that we are seeing a lot of happening with some countries attacking other places, not saying name of the countries here, but you've
Mm.
seen the more and more evolution of what we expect you to understand the basics of security so we can do that. So I think the next years will be a basic need. If you do not understand how security works in software, how I can hire you, right? Think about a person who if you hire a person to be a board guard, you expect that person to know this A, B, and C.
Yeah.
it'll be the same with security. We're gonna expect that you know at least the basics, and I think that's a thing that we are seeing more and more. And it's quite a change of generation because until 30, 40 years ago, you don't have all the software open the internet. If you think
Mm.
about banks, and I quite love the bank space for software engineering in the UK,
Mhm.
it was the first place that people was thinking about security, right? Because if you do some wrong thing, if somebody kind of attack, this will be a problem. One of the first attacks that is known about hackers was one guy calling to a bank and then just using a small thing to create a note, and that thing was broken the system. And then okay, now we need to protect against kind of stuff. So I think we're gonna like, okay, do you understand the basics as we expect that people understand the basics of cloud and other skills because it will be quite important for the whole ecosystem that you have between inside of the companies. We have these people with this knowledge more spread out. And that is one thing that you see a lot inside of companies like security hours training, how people understand security, because we need that people know that. It's especially as when we get older and it's like, oh God, I really wish that in university somebody taught me about taxes, about accounting, about like personal finances.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
security is going to be like, we really need to teach the people about that. And that's expectation of the market that the new software engineers know at least the base of security to proper do the jobs.
That's a good way to put it, actually. I like the way that you phrase that, where, now that we're our age, you kind of think to yourself, you wish that they'd taught you about personal finances. It's the same thing with security, right? So
Exactly.
that's where we're at
Exactly.
now. I like that. Okay. So you spoke about how you should hire people with that security mindset. What about if you're an engineering leader and you've got a team of 30 or 40 software engineers? And it's a lot of people to manage, obviously. How would an engineering leader identify the security gaps within that engineering team if they're already working on live projects, they've already got a lot of workload? How does a leader identify security gaps in there?
So there's some things, right? One thing as a leader is, especially if you think about a 30 or 40 engineers, you need to trust each other. So one thing that's a problem for the human is called bias. So you not never ask for the engineer who is doing the project to review the project about security because he
Yeah,
must have the
yeah,
view, right? You got the bias, like it's your baby, like you got that bias. So the
yeah.
first thing is peer review, like okay, who's the people who got the most security knowledge inside, and who's the people who got the less security knowledge. So you pair them together and then go to another project to check how they are doing the small things. And then this lovely thing that people don't talk too much is called threat modeling. Threat modeling, you can do using a simple framework to understand so why people are doing this thing, when, and it's kind of small questions. So the
Mhm.
first thing is I quite like to teach, right? So this kind of is workshop, like you teach things like threat modeling, and then you start to have okay, how we use a framework like Stride, that's a framework for threat modeling, and from that framework we can check what's working, what's not working as a team.
Mm.
That's the first thing. To be quite fair, one thing that I used to try to have is to work with consultancies to have like some pen tests, some third-party assessment. So they give overview like, okay, you have these most risks here, and then your team can follow this path. But let's go on the way that we don't have a budget. We need to use everybody's side of the team to work on that way. I pretty much to break in small silos. Okay, you Mark, you check the software from Joe, Joe, you check the software for Alan, and so on.
Mm.
And then we start to talk together and see, okay, what's the most common problems? One thing that I quite love to work with one guy, he was a pen test for Kubernetes, and he always says that after a couple of years, the job got boring because everybody's kind of doing the same mistakes.
Mm.
So security is kind of stuff that people think about attack, this really movie thing, like the guy was doing this kind of amazing thing and broke stuff. But if it was that easy, it would be quite easy to people to broke things. So most of the attacks, they are quite normal. They are trying to do the same thing over and over, over and over. And then if you have the basics in place, it will be a little bit harder, but not impossible, right? The creativity of the most of the hackers that I met in my career, they are amazing. Like they just have this kind of idea outside of the box they're not expecting. But just going back, not digressing about the whole things, having this kind of peer reviews and start to put people to think together and to understand, and starting for a simple workshop. Sometimes we think about secret about this really complicated thing and you don't know how to start. And it's always better to start in a small pace than just wait for the perfect time, right?
Mm.
And if secret's the same, like you need to start. Like you cannot be there's not one phrase for Google that I love that's hope is not a strategy. So like how would you get people and then you're like, hey, let's check things, let's review,
Mm.
and that will be part of our engineering process. there's one thing from the past, and I quite like Joe, is in the past they got this attraction between software engineering and cybersecurity and compliance. And I always say is that really need to work together. It's not like a cliche and like a utopia thing, but you need to understand that we need the software engineer as much than in security. It's a kind of a two-way road. If you have the best software in the world that's not safe, this will not be okay. If you
Mm,
have the most safest software in the world that nobody can use, that makes sense as well. So
mm,
how do you think together as a team, how other people get the view? It's pretty much how you do these things. And especially also, especially most of the software engineers team that I had the pleasure to work, we got this thing that we call software engineer for security. So how do you have the both of us with people who got a really strong secret background and people for software engineering background that work together and then they find the problems? Because one secret guy can say like just close everything and they go like yeah but we cannot do that because A, B, and C. So how we can find the common ground, like how we can
mm.
find the balance between both sides.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. So when we talk about security and software engineering, a lot of the time we're talking about like negative things, right? Because there's someone
Yeah.
that's been hacked, there's data that's been lost, or there's some vulnerability somewhere. But when you and I spoke about 6 or 7 weeks ago, you told me about a story on how security can be inclusive.
Oh yes.
You told me about your friend's company. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, if I think we did chat in the beginning of the podcast, if somebody's here, will be here again. It's pretty much the MFA to FA things for people
Yeah.
in that specific case who got some special needs for visibility, like for especially your vision. So
Mm.
pretty much we always think, and it did not go only on software engineer, but we always think systems for everybody in the perfect conditions. We never think about, oh, we have this building on the 35th floor if the elevator broke, if the lift broke. So how would you this kind of stuff? And then I quite like one thing that Google did in the past. Like if you go in your Chrome, you can have a special view for people who got color blindness.
Mm.
And I think even security is going on that way, right? So how do you think spaces that we can include security in a way that people who are not in the what we call such perfect conditions, that's not perfect, but that's another discussion, that they can use the systems they can understand and then can be included on that because nobody wants to be part of a scam, nobody wants to lose money, everybody wants to have access to information.
Yeah.
So there's a thing that we need to improve is how we can put this kind of questions like okay, if you have a person who got color blindness, if you have a person who not hear well, so how we can find different solutions that include security and think about usability and think about how the user is feeling safe and how he feels part of that thing. So I quite love when my friend talk about that in healthcare company about like, no, we need to think how a person who don't know how to type, how a person who are not allowed, is not able to see well, will be included in the whole security because we don't want to have people in loops, right? Oh,
Yeah.
let's go back to the security thing. Like, oh, we have the most security thing in the world, but we don't have a way to that person to use it, and that is why the system start to broke. Because again, you need your user to use. So if you do what we call in Portuguese a gambiarra or a way around, this will just weaken the security of the thing because you're not thinking about how to include, but just to find every edge case and then start, okay, we will not consider that. We're gonna say that every single person who cannot see will have a less layer of security. And then the hackers will start to say like, oh, we can follow this path. So you
Mm.
need to think security is a stuff that includes everybody, not just the usual type of user that you're expecting.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. When we first spoke about that, the my mind would go to certain things like, when you've got Braille, if people are like using
Mhm.
Braille to read, and so my brain went there. So when you was explaining your friends um 2FA for visually impaired people, that was really, really
Yeah,
cool. So I wanted to share that.
it's amazing. And
Yeah.
it's fantastic that we never think about that, right? We
Mm.
always go like, oh, yeah. It's like we never think until we need it. So I think that's much stuff that we need to think as a
Yeah.
software engineer, security engineer, like we need to think before need to do because it's the right thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk to you about, specifically related to security, is revenue. So security is often seen as a cost center
Yeah.
for a lot of leaders, for a lot of companies, and obviously I think for the last half an hour we've been speaking about why it's not just a cost
Hmm.
center. But how can a shift in mindset translate into greater revenue for tech companies? What's the change in mindset that we need to have?
So there's one lovely company in Brazil that they had like it's kind of white label company who do e-commerce and they start to create security features, right? Oh, if you have to have more access for your logs, etc., you can pay a little bit more.
Mm.
I think the main problem is people do not talk about security the same way we talk about platform. Oh, we say like, oh, we need to scale our software because we have like three, four, five more users. This will help. So it's pretty much we need to have this kind of product mindset in security, right? Having security embedded in your software, it's better for the user and better for you. Let's just go and step back and think about the usability thing that we talk about, people who got problems with got view impairments, right?
Yeah,
When you have a software who cover this, the software is better. Then you bring more revenue, then you achieve more people. The amount of impact that you do is bigger. That's the first part. The other thing is we talk a lot about compliance, like things like SOC 2, PCI. Security allows you to do more work. Security, if you are doing security in the way that's slowing you down, that's quite, it's not okay. So, for example, I have a company in the UK. Now I want to go to the APAC market, right? It's a whole different market,
yeah,
a whole different set of
yeah.
laws and etc. Security helps you to open that path to go then say like we have everything that your government, that your companies need to be compliant to be okay. So it's kind of the same way that says like, oh, we just want more money to get this compliance bit in place, but it's just about the word and then you need security to open avenue. You need security to open new markets. You need security to people to understand that's kind of amazing thing they are doing. I'm gonna give you a lovely example. If you go to a cinema in the UK, one of the things they are showing is WhatsApp saying we do not see your message. This got this whole campaign that's quite amazing. So that's how to use a security feature to sell more. Because they are saying you can use us, you can be there, and then you're gonna be safe. But
Yeah.
if you're
Trust
using
us.
WhatsApp, is it trust us exactly? If you're using WhatsApp for that, oh, now they have a shop thing. I use that to other
Mm,
stuff. Oh, now you have a way to send money by WhatsApp. Now I use that platform. And they use security as an open door, like you can trust us.
mm,
And that's pure security. We are talking about cryptography. We are talking about every single basic security thing as a product. So you can see that everywhere right now. So it's pretty much this change of mindset of product. It's not, sorry, security is not a cost center, but it's one thing that helps your product to achieve more users, to
mm,
be usable for more people, and etc. Right? That is one soft one app that we use a lot that's called Signal. It's pretty much kind of WhatsApp, but Signal was built on the idea of security. And that's quite nice because a lot of people who like security start to use because of that. How do you sell that for the masses, right? How do
mm,
the thing that WhatsApp is doing? It's quite of amazing example, like you can trust us, you are safe with us. So they start to sell starting for security. So it's amazing, right?
mm,
Because we saw a lot of time ago, like, oh, nobody was talking about cryptography. Nobody was talking about security as the future in a product. We are in the age that we are so interconnected that I don't want to share my information with other people. In the NHS today, that's a problem, right? Because we have really old systems that do not communicate really well with each other.
yeah.
And now they are thinking about security, like, okay, because I want to transfer the data from Joe that's living in London, because they're gonna move to Sheffield. I want to have doing a proper and easy way. And then you have this amount of health techs really putting effort in security and say your data is safe with us. This will not leak. So that's how you sell, how do you show the revenue. Like security will open your markets, they will not close doors. It's just the other way
Mm.
around.
I think a lot of people's mindset is that, if we focus too much on security up front, we're going to miss our gap in the market. We're going to slow our time to market down. And I think that's probably what holds a lot of people back from implementing
Mhm.
proper security features from day zero, rather than just quick, let's launch and then we'll think about security later.
And I think that's, I did heard that from a lot of CEOs, to be fair, I'm not gonna
Mm,
lie. And it's just about finding, again, the balance, right? No security at all, it's a problem, but spending in security sometimes quite expensive. You spend
mm,
your whole budget that you have just
mm,
on security, will not put you in a fit for the market. So always find the common ground, right? So how we have the basics, how we can show what we do, you be a safer way, you be a privacy way.
mm,
It's pretty much about that, right? So how you can show both sides. Because in the end, I joke as a people manager, I joke a lot about that with my direct reports. the main objective of the companies is to make more money. I will not be hypothetical here, like that's the main thing. But again, how you can show, okay, we can do that in that way that will help the company, will help the environment as well. So I think that's a movement that we are quite changing. But again, it's quite hard because on the other way around, if you see every single security company, they're quite expensive. But one nice example, right? People love to talk that security is a cost center, but if you go look at Google, the biggest acquisition from a company that Google did in the whole history was Wiz. And Wiz is a security company for cloud. So that's the main thing that shows if a company like Google is buying that, I think it was 32 billion, I can be wrong, but it was like a lot of money,
Wow.
was like by far, if you compare with YouTube, was like just bizarre. But why they are doing that? Because they know how important it is to have this kind of thing, and they know that sometimes it's too best to invest than to have that in the house. So maybe Google will spend a lot way less money if they did that in their in-house. So that's how shows like security is growing the market and how
Yeah.
companies who do security is quite expensive. And people want to have this knowledge because we will open other doors, will not close. So that's how you go like we go on that way of revenue, not
Yeah.
just only thinking about oh this will be a cost center.
32 billion that acquisition was.
Yes, exactly. And there's a lovely infographic that shows the acquisitions from Google, and then Wiz is just a peak. It's just a whole different game. We understand that the market evolves, but I think if you look at YouTube, for example, that's one of the biggest revenue centers from Google. Okay, it was decades ago, but again, it was way cheaper,
Mm,
even if you do like the inflation thing.
mm.
So that's how we are evolving, seeing security as a part of the business who brings money, not a part of the business that is a cost center. And then, to be fair, it's sad to say, but everybody needs cybersecurity. Like everybody needs to be close to that. So
Mm.
it's a part of the business that came to stay that are here from if you think about the lovely history about cryptography, like since the Romans, they are doing that. Since like the ancient ages, how do you change information? How do you pass information in a safe way
Mm.
between wars and etc. In the moment that becomes a simple commodity for us, will be one thing that will be in your day to day more and more, right? Um, one example that I hate, but it's really tough, is you are seeing in the US a lot of kids going to the court against their fathers because they did post a lot of pictures and etc. And that the whole thing was just in the market. Like that was my image, right? So people start to think a little more about privacy, about how they expose it on the internet and
The
etc.
kids took their
Yes,
fathers to court for posting
yes,
pictures of them
exactly.
when they was a kid.
Exactly. Because I told I was exposed to that. I was exposed to I did not have access to the money, that was the whole thing. And I don't have the free will to choose if I want to do that, right? Because even if the kids stop to that do that right now at 18 years, let's say, all the information that was online for the past 17, it's there. It's on the wild. So how do you create security controls to help this kind of case as well? So
Wow.
how do you yeah, it's quite amazing. We can
Mm.
talk about hours and hours, but when we start to think how amazing the internet is, but how many security concerns created, right? We have these really bizarre things of like with pedophiles and etc. But again, how
Mm.
do you protect people here? Not just because you want to protect money, but how do you protect the safety
The
and the
people.
freedom? Is exactly I quite like of that of security. And then you have a
Yeah.
lot of our NGs that talk about how we think about privacy. How do you think about the access of information, of how other people processing your data. One thing that happens a lot in Europe, you see the big techs, they always get this kind of really big bill because they are breaking some privacy laws. And that's quite nice to see, especially in Germany, how they think about their privacy. Like, okay, we need to have the ownership of that thing, not a social network, no other place. And that's
Yeah.
how security come from the beginning. How do you evolve on that mindset of, okay, that's important for me, for my family, for the other people that you come.